Good afternoon. I just want to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that we meet on today, the Wurundjeri people, since we are based in Melbourne, and pay my respect to the elders past, present, and emerging. So welcome to another AUSVEG webinar. We've had a series of these where we bring expertise and knowledge to leading issues that are facing our industry. Today, we'll be talking about Diamondback moth, which is, as we know, is an incredibly destructive pest of brassicas globally. And we really are fortunate to have a range of expertise available here to us in Australia. And they will be sharing their respective experiences and insights on how they have worked to limit the impact of the moth on the crops that they work with or deal with. So we will be hearing from Troy Mulcahy, who's the Market Development Manager at Bayer Crop Sciences. And he has over 19 years of experience in hort. And he will essentially be looking after the chemistry options for dealing with the Diamondback moth. And we'll also discuss how to combat some of the resistance issues that we are facing within the country as well as globally. Following this, we'll have John Duff from QDAF, who will focus on the integrated pest management approach to DBM. We then will go over to Queensland and hear Lockyer Valley and hear from Zara Hall, who's the Industry Development Manager for the VegNet program. And she will be talking about a really unique program that she has been running in the Lockyer that uses a calendar system of spray windows to achieve area-wide management for their growing region. So that should be interesting. And finally, if all technology works well, and we hope it does, we will be hearing from Stuart Grigg, who is an independent agronomist based out of Victoria, and he's an advisor and director at the Ag Hort Consulting. Stuart will come to us live from a field in Werribee and will explain how chemistry and IPM will work together in the management of DBM. And hopefully he'll be able to show us some real life examples in the field on how the crop is being managed with a combination of chemistry and IPM. We will have opportunity for Q&A at the end, about 15 to 20 minutes. If you would like to ask a question, on the bottom right-hand corner, you will see a Q&A tab. Please type in your question and we will facilitate that at the end of the webinar. If there are any questions that are left unanswered, we will have sent to a follow-up email and address those questions in that follow-up email. So, and thank you for joining us. I'm Zarmeen Hassan from AUSVEG, and I will hand over to Troy from Bayer now. Over to you, Troy.
Thank you, Zarmeen. I'll just bring up this presentation slide. So I'm hoping everyone can see that okay.
Yes, we can. Troy, if you can just go to slideshow mode, that would be great.
Just, excuse me, just for 1 moment. Okay, is that better? Okay, so everyone, so yeah, thank you. My name's Troy Mulcahy, as per the intro. Yeah, I live and based out of Geelong in Victoria, and have been working in horticulture for around about 19 years, focused mostly on vegetable crop times, focused on horticultural crop protection with Bayer Crop Science. So what I will do today is just step through a few of the topics with more of an introduction. So look at basically an introduction to the pest itself, the DBM. Look at a little bit around insecticide resistance and some of the, I guess, some of the theory around that. And then most importantly, look at some of the crop life results. So there have been some resistance management programs that have been put together over recent years. So I'll give an update on some of those outcomes and some of the strategies to be considered, and also just wind up on some final thoughts about how to manage DBM. So if we look at the pest itself, starting with the adult, it's an adult that can travel reasonably long distances, and when it's in the crop. So for regions like where Stu is today in Werribee South, when you've got lots of growers on top of each other, growing next to each other, it can migrate from crop to crop. But once it's within crop, generally stays reasonably, doesn't travel too far from that source. So the adults themselves can lay up to 200 eggs in its lifetime. So it's a big factor in terms of population development. So the adult will lay the eggs, and then after a short period of time, larvae will hatch and will develop through 4 instar stages before pupating and then completing the life cycle. So probably the take-home message here from this slide is around temperature. So obviously, the warmer the temperature is, so nice sort of warm summer conditions in let's say Werribee South or in Victoria, where you're looking at sort of 25 to 28 degrees. This cycle is happening in about 14 days, and it's an important consideration when we think about how we are managing the pest, and particularly if we're applying chemistry. And we'll talk more about trying to target single generation. So that generation is over a 14-day window. It is likely that we'll have to change mode of actions from that point forward. So again, this is just more of a theoretical slide about how resistance can develop, and what we're aiming not to do is what's on the left-hand side. So if we look at a population of insects, and maybe in this case of DBM, in any one population there will be a number of resistant DBM. So if we're using a single mode of action over multiple generations, you may wipe out many of the susceptible population in the first instance. But if you continue to use that mode of action and allow those resistant DBM to again work through their life cycle, you'll see that resistant population will increase over time. And that's really effectively what we're trying to prevent. And that's why we're talking about mixing up and using mode of action selectively, rotating them, being very focused on the generations and the life cycle of the pest, and making sure that while chemistry is a tool that we can use, it's only one tool. We've got other methods that we can rely on in terms of some cultural control methods, biological control methods, that we can really help try and target what we're doing on that right-hand side of that slide. So again, we started a population with largely susceptible DBM, and there may be some resistant. So over time, if we're mixing up the mode of action and we're using other methods of control, we can keep that population in check. So I've just put together some information here and more from reference material. So we talk about product options in terms of chemistry for DBM. They're publicly available through the AUSVEG website, and you'll go in there and you search in Diamondback Moth, and it'll split out many hundreds of products. So there's many products that are registered for DBM. But in terms of resistance management, what's most important is we're thinking about modes of action. And I've listed out a few. This is actually a bit of a cut and paste table out of the CropLife website, and just noted it was put together in the middle of 2020. And it just illustrates that we actually don't have too many modes of action to work with in the field. And some of them are very old, and some of them are very selective to the pest, and some of them are very broad spectrum. But regardless, the modes of action is what we really need to think about when we're rotating chemicals, not necessarily the brand names, although it's important that we understand how those products do fit together. So I have put some trade name examples there. There's many different trade names. Like I said, there's many products, but these are some of the common ones in Victoria. So now, what I want to do is just present some of the findings from CropLife. So through a period of time through 2017 and to 2019, a large amount of samples of Platella were taken from across the country. And you see the split there: 15 out of Queensland, 5 Victoria, 2 in South Australia, and 2 in New South Wales. That was a collaborative effort where we collected those Platella. Those Platella would then, the Diamondback Moth would go into SARDI for resistance basically testing, and then that data has been returned back into CropLife. So when we look at that data there, and I'll walk through it in a little bit, we do see some active ingredients where it's showing that potential that we're losing field performance. So particularly in group the 5s, group 6 and group 28s, which is really concerning. And basically how they've defined it, that when they're seeing that less than 95% efficacy is in play here, then we're seeing a shift in that population. So what I would draw your attention to on the graphs, if we start on the left-hand side, is the Queensland data. And I know Zara will talk more specifically about this a little bit later on, but we have seen the percentage mortality against groups 5, 6 and 28 a lot lower than we would expect to, and particularly at the time that these products were registered, it is a long way back to where we would like them to be. So for Queensland, I guess they're at the forefront of managing this pest, and hence they're coming up some specific strategies for their specific regions. But also I'd just like to highlight that Victoria, South Australia, New South Wales, it's certainly not just a Queensland issue. We're seeing shifts in the population, maybe not quite to the degree, but we possibly have some time now just to really take stock and think about our chemistry and try and prevent the slide in efficacy further from this point. So if we look at some of the recommendations or findings, is CropLife will continue to monitor the resistance for DBM and provide information and data that can support information strategies. But some of the key recommendations is really to encourage growers and people involved in the industry to engage in using beneficial insects. So trying to take the reliance off chemistry, using Bacillus or BT products. So the biological products are a really nice rotational tool to take the pressure off resistance of these groups of chemistry. So they become increasingly important. Really trying to avoid broad spectrum insecticides. So where we're knocking out or working against our IPM programs, we're going to try and avoid that, particularly early in the crop where we can change that balance within the crop. Another, I guess, a piece of advice for all would be just to continue to monitor the crop, understand what's happening in the crop, and understands where your economic spray threshold is. So if you're growing a cauliflower or a broccoli, you may be able to accept some level of damage, where if you're growing maybe a cabbage or an Asian vegetable, your threshold might be much higher than that. Early larvae, because this is where I guess the chemistry is the most effective. So, and basically continue to monitor after application to make sure that you're getting the control that you're after. So I think just to round out, just some final thoughts is, I think we've just said it there before, but monitoring is so critical. Understanding the amount of DBM you have in any particular field, the instar or the life cycle of what's happening in the field, but also other pests come into your decision making, that if you need chemistry and if you do need chemistry, what to use. So that becomes a really important part of putting a program together. Culture and biological strategies have been around for quite a long time. And I know a lot of growers have gone down this track and worked with maybe a biological approach, such as introducing diadegma. It's now probably a good time to go back and re-look at those type of programs where we know that there is issues that are here and now today and emerging in some regions. So we'll need to really reinforce what we're doing from a chemical side to be able to prevent that chemistry from losing relevance, and really trying to avoid spraying on a calendar basis. Always follow label directions, so making sure that the rate is at the accurate rate, and making sure that application conditions are good and coverage is good. It's really important if there's any mention of using adjuvants. Adjuvants for some products are there for a purpose, to make sure that the chemistry is getting into the plant and moving well throughout the plant. So that becomes very important for effective management, and also effective, reducing that risk of resistance over time. And probably, again, just to reiterate that the beneficial species, not only for DBM, for other insects, are so precious and so important for us. So protecting them and really making sure we're making conscious decisions about maybe broad spectrum insecticides and when they can be used is really critical. So I think basically on that, I'll probably round out to say that, yeah, back into that monitoring after application is really critical. You know, if you're seeing a problem and you feel like there is a problem in the field, don't keep redoing what you have been doing. Don't keep putting the same mode of action back into that field. You're probably exacerbating a problem that may be there. So certainly consider completing resistance testing and engaging with the industry and the market around you to understand if there's a potential issue at hand. So I would say thank you for that, and I guess on that note, hand over to John.
Okay, can everyone see my screen?
Yeah.
Yep, excellent. Okay, I'm with the Queensland Department of Agriculture and Fisheries. I've been working with vegetable crops, particularly IPM, for a good 2 decades now. So I've got fair experience in IPM technology and what you need to do in order to implement IPM in your crop. Why isn't it going? There we go. I was impressed with a talk that IPM Technologies gave to our local growers a while back on IPM. And they came up with basically there's 4 aspects of good IPM. First is knowing what you actually have in your crop. There's no point just putting on a chemical if you don't know why you're putting it on, or doing some sort of control practice if you don't know why you're doing it. And that goes hand in hand with knowing what biocontrol agents or beneficial insects you have in your crop. You can find eggs in your crop, some of which will be parasitized like this egg raft. But if you don't know that, you may just see an egg raft like this and think, I need to spray because I'm going to have a lot of larvae caterpillars emerging shortly. And you're actually killing off a lot of your beneficial insects at the same time. So as Troy mentioned, monitoring is exceedingly important in any IPM program. So when you monitor, you just don't go into a crop, have a look at a couple of plants. If you see something, go and get something or put some sort of spray program in place and try and control it. You need to have a good look within your crop, and that means wandering over your crop in different locations, different times, just to see what you're having. And the last thing that you need to do is, in any IPM program, is reach for the chemical. But you do, in some cases, have to have a chemical control option. IPM is not about eliminating the use of chemicals. It's just about using them strategically and wisely. Because not everything, biocontrol, cultural control options are going to be effective. You do need to have chemicals as part of that IPM approach. So knowing just what you've got in your crop, growing crops up here, we have a plethora of insects, as I'm sure you all do as well. Diamondback moth, center grub, cabbage white butterfly, cluster caterpillars, and ones that are more Queensland centric, your cabbage cluster caterpillar. This is actually a spray trial which got decimated. White flies, there are a number of different white flies that you can get. We have silver leaf, there's a cabbage white fly and greenhouse white fly as well. A number of aphids, thrips, and there is a lot of diseases also which attack brassicas. I'm not going to cover those in any great detail. It's a little bit harder putting an IPM program together for diseases, but some of the options that you have are selecting varieties that have some resistance to, say, black rot or white blister, or even alternaria. Reducing how you actually water your crop may also help with regards combating some of these diseases. So some of your cultural control options are probably just as effective as some of your spray programs. So when you look at beneficial insects and which ones you can actually find attacking which pest, I've bolded the ones which you can actually purchase. They're available from biocontrol agents in Australia: Diadegma, Trichogramma, lacewings, lady beetles. They're readily available in large numbers where you can introduce them into your crop at any time that's suitable for their development and also for combating your pest. But there is a lot of other beneficial insects. If you monitor your crop, either yourself or a consultant, agronomist, you will find a suite of biocontrol agents or beneficial insects that are actually taking up residence in your crop. They're working 24/7, free of charge. All you need to do is supply them with a food source. I've just put down a couple of websites for Bugs and Biological Services where you can actually access these beneficial insects. If you do look at introducing beneficial insects, it's always a great idea to talk to these guys, and they will help you as best they can, because they want to make sure that what you buy off them is going to work. They just don't want to sell you them for the sake of making money. They want to make sure you get the best value as you can out of them. Where are we? Oops, wrong one. Sorry, folks. Didn't mean to do that one. So cultural control options. As Troy mentioned, crop monitoring is the backbone of any good IPM program. If you don't know what you've got in the crop, how do you know that what you're going to be doing is going to work? Not only do you need to know what's in the crop to begin with, but once you put in place some sort of control method, control option, implemented it, you want to go back and monitor to make sure that it's actually working. You don't want to put on a chemical time and time again because you keep seeing insects in there. If it's not working, move on to something else. But monitoring is the backbone of any good IPM program. And even if that's all you do, it's still doing a limited form of IPM. Who's ever thought about supplying nectar sources for your beneficial insects? These are just a couple. Buckwheat is a very quick, fast-growing crop. Asteraceae type flowers are also full of pollen and nectar for a whole range of beneficial insects. If you have a nectar source, beneficial insects last a lot longer because they can feed on these flowers, and then they go back into your crop looking for a source of food to lay their eggs. Sequential plantings, or even having a sacrificial planting at the start of the season. These can be good so that you actually have the pests start up. You can either introduce beneficial insects or let them occur naturally, so that when you do start planting your crop proper, these will then move into your cash crop, working for you to control any outbreaks of pests and diseases. There are a large number of different traps out there that you can look at using. Light traps. These, I guess the biggest disadvantage of these is that they catch everything and anything. They only work at night, of course. This one is solar powered, so it's standalone. You don't need to connect it up to the grid. There are different types of pheromone traps, different shapes. The Delta trap, the top one, is a traditional one. And there are new ones called smart traps where they actually have a camera inbuilt into the trap. So you don't actually have to go out there and physically check it. You can have this calibrated for diamondback moth or any other kind of insect, and it'll take a picture to show you just what's actually in the trap. So you can actually monitor it remotely. Yellow sticky traps are a good source of telling you what's actually out there. You can't use them as a control option. They're just there as a monitoring tool. They work best during the day. The colour yellow is most attractive to a lot of insects. And then there's some new products coming out where they attract and kill the insects. Organic crop protectants and I can't remember the other one. There's a product that's attractive to the moth, which then starts sucking on the liquid, which is laced with a chemical, and before it knows it, it just falls over dead. Now, these ones are still sort of in the trial phase. We did try and have a look at them but last year, but our diamondback moth pressure was extremely low, so we're not sure how well they're going to go, but it is possible they'll have some effect, good effect, as more work is done with them. And then production breaks. Up here in Queensland, we generally had a 3-month production break over summer. And this helped reduce the diamondback moth pressure for the start of each growing season. So that's something to consider where you are. It may be useful. Try it out, see how it goes. And there are a lot of chemical options. Troy mentioned, I showed you a list of products as well. Most products which control diamondback moth will also control a range of your other caterpillar pests. I've color-coded these to show the effectiveness, or how effective they are, or how toxic they are, I should say, to beneficial insects. BT being probably the least toxic, going all the way down to your SPs and OPs, which are very detrimental to your beneficial insects. Some have what we call some sort of systemic activity, so they'll get into the leaf and move within the plant. Others are just straight contact where the insect actually has to ingest it in order for it to die. The same with a range of products for your whitefly, aphids and thrips. But just remember, these chemical control options should be your last resort. You shouldn't be reaching for them the first sign you see of insects in your crop. Monitoring helps you look for other things, your beneficial insects, as well as your pests. And knowing just what you have in there will allow you to strategically use these products so that you get the best bang for their buck. Now, a lot of what I've talked about is available in this publication, which was put out a number of years back. You can get access through our website, our Queensland DAF website. It's also available on the AUSVEG website, and it will cover a whole range of a lot more information than what I can give you today just in 10 minutes. IPM is, you can't impart the full benefit of IPM in a 10-minute webinar. It's something that takes a while to discuss, to develop for your specific crop, your specific situation. So I encourage you to seek out or try out and seek out this publication, have a read of it, download it, and see how you can actually then use it as part of your IPM system on your farm and in your crops. Yeah, that's about it. So I'll hand over to Zara.
Hi, everyone. So Lockie Valley growers started to experience challenges managing diamondback moth about 4 years ago. particularly with some of those more susceptible crops like cabbage and wombok. And that suspicion that there might be resistance there was confirmed in resistance testing that was done through CropLife using Greg Baker's lab at Sardi. And so there's resistance to almost all registered chemistry in brassicas. Since then, we've developed some resistance management strategies. There's a lot of things that we are doing differently, and generally growers would say now that they are able to adequately control diamondback moth, but the way in which they're doing it is different to how they've done it in the past. So we had a grower-initiated and industry-led insecticide resistance management strategy. If your region or if your farm doesn't have a resistance management strategy, the CropLife website has some really clear guidelines around what you should be doing and what you shouldn't be doing as far as resistance management goes. But the Lockyer Valley growers have a unique program for our region. And I'll just run through some of the things that might be of interest to other regions. The first one is, for us, while we are a predominantly winter production region, we do have 12 months of production. There are some brassicas that go through summer, and it's believed that that has contributed to firstly, just the population pressure of diamondback moth, but then also the resistance pressure on our insecticides. So we really do advocate for a production break in our region. In our area, centre grub is a real problem for us around March, and Derevo is a really useful product for us for that time, more for centre grub than for diamondback moth. But that's meant that we wanted to window all of our group 28s to that sort of first 3 months of the year to take advantage of that. And it hasn't been confirmed, but Greg Baker's team at Sardi suspect there's actually cross resistance between Proclaim and the group 28. So we've deliberately windowed Proclaim with the group 28s. Obviously, we can't just rely on pesticides, and we've had to take a really good look at how we are managing our system as a whole and make sure that we are conserving beneficials. So we've had some really great presenters from IPM Technologies talk to us about using pesticides effectively and making sure you're avoiding those ones that have an impact on key beneficials like diadegma. A couple of years ago, if you'd asked growers locally what their thoughts were on inundative releases of diadegma, a lot of them would have told you that it doesn't work. And there's reasons for that, but we've learned a lot about how to manage diadegma in our region. So diadegma is a temperate parasitoid, and when growers have released it in February, when we can still get 40+ degree days, it's just not suitable for diadegma, which really prefers those cooler conditions. So we know a lot more about our beneficials than we did 4 years ago, and we know when to be releasing them and how to help them thrive when we do release them. So 4 years ago, you wouldn't have seen a grower planting alyssum, but now it's not uncommon for growers to plant alyssum in their hedgerows and throughout headlands and throughout their crop. Monitoring is so important for an IPM program. The best way to conserve pesticides is to not use pesticides if you can possibly help it. And if you're not out there monitoring and making sure that you know exactly what's going on with your pest pressure, you can't possibly be making good decisions. So monitoring is so important. I've just put a few tools and links up here that we've used in the Lockyer Valley. So the Jessica Page's impact tables, the pesticide impact tables have been really handy to know which chemistry has impacts on which beneficials. And so knowing what impacts diadegma or other beneficials in our systems is really important. We use the Diamondback Moth development calculator. And when you're thinking about resistance management, the key with resistance management is that thing around not exposing 2 consecutive generations to the one mode of action. And so if you don't know what your generation time is, you can't be making good decisions on that. So we've got this development calculator. In summer, that might mean a generation is 10 days. In winter, it might be 40 or 50 days. And that plays into when we're next rotating into a new mode of action. And it might mean that we actually do 2 back-to-back BTs before rotating into a new mode of action, depending on what that generation time is. So there's a link there for that. And it's just an Excel file at the moment. It'd be great if it was developed into an application, maybe someone like AUSVEG who could do something like that. But at the moment, it's just an Excel file. You just download your BOM data. And I normally just send a text message out to we have about 60 brassica growers in the Lockyer. We send a group text message out and everyone knows what the development time is. Another thing in the Lockyer, a couple of years ago, growers were a little bit skeptical about the effectiveness of BTs, and we've had to really relearn how to get the most out of our BTs, because it's one of the only things that's really working at the moment. If you saw Troy's slide at the beginning, there is some level of tolerance to almost all registered chemistry in brassicas. And so with those BTs, making sure you're spraying into the afternoon or into the night time when your UV is low, make sure you're getting your water volume right, using your stickers, all those things are really important to get the most out of your BTs. And generally speaking, growers are now fairly satisfied with BTs as a spray, and they can use them more, conserve their beneficials, and then only be using something like a Success Neo or a Belt when they really do need it at critical times in that brassica growth stage. As an industry, we've done a lot of things with our growers, particularly our new entrants to industry, to make sure that they are understanding how to apply chemicals well. So we've got some little guides up there, a calibration form and a how-to for how to calibrate your booms. Lisa Beeling from Nutrien, put on a dye demonstration night with Maddie Moyle. And these sort of nights are great for growers to get together, learn from each other and look at different nozzle selection, different water volume, different wetters, and see how to get good penetration into that crop to make the most out of their chemistry. Some of the learnings from the Lockyer, one of the big ones was a couple of years ago when we were referring to chemicals, we pretty much exclusively referred to them by their trade name. So we referred to products as Derivo, Coragen, Belt. We didn't refer to them as their mode of action. And I am aware that there were situations where growers did put a Derivo drench on and then followed it up with a Coragen and then followed that up with a Belt. And it's because we referred to things by their trade name, not their group. And now, as part of our normal language, we are always using groups. Everyone in the Valley knows what a group 28 is. And so they know when they're rotating out of that, away from a Derivo into something else. They're not backing up a Derivo with a Coragen or Belt. And the learning for us in the Lockyer Valley has been this thing around not exposing 2 consecutive generations to the same mode of action. And that's why it's really important to know what your development time is. You can't, it's possible, I've seen it, where growers have gone, they've rotated their chemistry, but not within, they've done it within one generation. So there's the risk that you are actually exposing multiple generations to the same mode of action, which is the worst thing you can do for resistance. So getting that right is really critical. The best thing we can do for managing resistance is to not spray chemicals. So So monitoring your crop really carefully and making sure when you are applying it is because there is pests at an economic threshold. That's really important for resistance, and making sure you're getting the most out of the chemicals when you do use them, making sure, like if you're using a BT, that you're applying it in low UV conditions. All of those things are so important. And then the same for the beneficials, making sure they're getting the most out of them. If you're doing an inundated release of didegma, don't then go and use something that's highly disruptive. So using those impact tables has been really important for growers in the Lockyer. I've just put a few resources there if anyone wants to track them down. So there's the CropLife Australia resistance management strategies, and the development calculator for Diamondback Moth is useful, as well as the pesticide impact tables for brassicas. And Jessica from IPM Technologies has put together impact tables, not just for brassicas, they exist for almost all of your major vegetable lines. And so that's a handy resource. So I'll leave it there. That's my contact details if you need to get in touch, and thanks everyone.
Right, Stuart, let's see if we can get you. Technology is working. If you can come off mute and we'll see if we can hear you well.
There we go. How are we going? Can you hear me, Zamet?
Loud and clear, thank you, and we can see you as well. Over to you.
Beautiful. Look at that, half the battle. So yeah, welcome to Werribee South, everyone. I'm just here with Shane Sutherland as well, the farm manager here at Fresh Select Farms. So we're going to take you for a little bit of a wander through the cauliflower crop here at Fresh Select. And I'm just going to flip this around and just talk a little bit around some of the challenges we've had with Diamondback Moth, some of our management strategies we have here on the farm. And we run a pretty stringent IPM program through all the brassicas here on farm. We have a lettuce and brassica rotation across the property. Yeah, so we'll just run through a few of the points here, and I think Zara, John, and Troy have covered a huge portion of the theoretical and the side of agronomy that we want to achieve in theory, and let's just have a look at how we're going to actually achieve it on the farm and what we do. And I guess the first part of it was when the Diamondback moth resistance issues occurred, or started to occur 3 and 4 years ago. I was quite concerned living in Werribee South, or in southern Victoria, and looking to try and understand the impact that it would have on our crops out here in Werribee. And so I made a few phone calls to some growers up in Queensland, and you know, I got some interesting comments back, and I just wanted to share them. I'm not going to mention specifics, but one grower said, "No, I'm not having any troubles. We just keep spraying." I thought, okay, that was interesting. And then I had another grower I spoke to, and the comment there was, "Yeah, we're rotating belt and coragen." And that goes back to what Zara was talking, you know, about understanding the chemistry, understanding the chemical groups, and really trying to get the most out of them and protect those chemical groups as well in the field. So our practice here on farm is to really understand exactly what we're looking at, what we're seeing. And so Shane and I are just going to go for a quick walk in the crop, and we'll have a look. This is a cauliflower crop. What age crop's this, Shane? Week 7, I think. Yeah, week 7 cauliflower crop. So we're at week 11 now. So this is a 4-week-old cauliflower crop. So we're sort of looking at what our tolerance thresholds might be in a 4-week-old cauliflower crop. You know, can we let it go a little bit? Can we have a fraction more grubs across this crop? And just see what's let the pests go a little bit, let the beneficial insects come in here, have a look at what's going on. Looking in the hearts of these crops, I hope you can all see them. We're just trying to find and see if there's any Diamondback moth in here, or any Platella in here in the crop. So this crop, Shane, we were just talking about it before. We've sprayed this once so far, haven't we?
Yeah, last week, yeah.
We've sprayed it once last week. And for an insecticide point of view, what have we used? Can you remember?
Movento and some coragen.
Movento and coragen. So the coragen was obviously chasing Lepidopteran insects, and the Movento was chasing aphids. We've actually had a few aphids down here this year. We've had quite a few cabbage aphids, and they've been a little bit of a challenge lingering through summer. So I'm actually having a look through here. Normally at this stage, we would find a little bit of grub pressure. We would be letting a crop grow. go a little bit. Here's a little bit of cabbage aphid pressure. You can see that sort of twisting of the leaf just there. I'm not sure if it's coming through on the screen, but that's had a little bit of cabbage aphid pressure on it there. And I can see a tiny bit of damage in the heart in that leaf there, and that's had probably a Platella Diamondback moth larvae having a bit of a go at that crop a couple of weeks ago. We've had probably more cabbage white butterfly pressure in the crops this year down here in Werribee South. You can see the cabbage white butterfly flying through over there, hopefully, than we have had Platella pressure. But those understanding those tolerance thresholds are really, really important. We can let them go a little bit early in the crop, and we can sort of work with them. So the scouting is a massive part of what we do, and getting through the crop and trying to understand exactly what pests pressures are around, and understanding the beneficials that are here, and making a sort of a call on. Here we go. Here's a cauliflower that's obviously been chewed a fair bit, so we've let that one go a little bit. There's another one over here just near Shane's boot. We can see a little bit of grub pressure there on that one there. So that's old sort of grub pressure there, and another one just here as well. Shane's got another one just there. Yep, beautiful. So we've let those go. Now we've come in and we've said, okay, there's enough. If we're early on the crop, quite often using a BT, one of the Dipelus Entaris or something like that. Here we've got some Diamondback Moth Traps, which we're actually using in crop, and we started using them for the first time this year, didn't we, Shane? Yep. And what are they costing? They're costing us about $400, I think it is a year.
Pretty cheap, really, considering like one spray saved us that anyway. So
yeah, that's right, and
pick it up. So.
Yeah, that's right. So $400 a year. That's for the trap, the sticky traps that we're changing in that every week. That's for the pheromones that we change every 4 weeks or so. And they've been a real sort of real savior for us, haven't they? You know, that we've probably saved 2 or 3 sprays in the year, just because it gives us a bit more confidence in actually what we're seeing in the field, and a bit more confidence that we can actually stretch some sprays out a little bit more. So that's probably what the 3 targets here in this crop. I'm just going to wander across to a Collini crop on the other side of the track here. So Collini is actually our fresh select sprouting cauliflower, which is being marketed into Coles. And so I suppose where I wanted to go here is we've seen what sort of tolerance thresholds we've got over in the crop, the younger crop, but now we want to understand what our tolerance thresholds are in the older crop. So if we go up here to one that's got some curds in it, our tolerance here at harvest is pretty much nil, would you say?
Yeah.
Pretty much nil. So we want to really keep it clean. So we'll generally save that sort of Success Neo or the Proclaim if we're going down that path, or one of the 28s for sort of later in the crop where we need to. So let's have a look at some buttons in here. So being a Collini crop, it actually looks a fair bit different to cauliflower. It's a sprouting cauliflower. And here we go. Oh, there's a ladybird on my hand right there, just as soon as I open up. So that's a good sign. So these we've got a very low tolerance of Diamondback moth or aphid or anything in these crops now at this sort of age of the crop. So we're making sure that we're generally holding those insecticides back later in the crop. And I guess we also wanted to touch on IPM, and that's obviously a main focus of what we do here at Fresh Select Farms, and it's not that hard. It takes a little bit of management, doesn't it? We were talking, I was at Zara was just saying about use of BTs later in the afternoon. What's the sort of practice we use here at Fresh Selection?
Yeah, well, look, especially on warmer days with like UV, like our spray guy usually comes back maybe 6, 7 o'clock in the afternoon. Sometimes it's a bit of a challenge, but yeah, we do our best. We've been caught once or twice before, where you spray out a window just under a bit of pressure, and you might as well just dip it down the drain. It doesn't work, basically. But anyway.
So that sort of timing is so critical, isn't it? I mean,
definitely critical.
If we're using an insecticide that's systemic or that's translaminar, we need to get that on and hold that onto the leaf and give it some time to suck into the leaf. If we're using a BT where we're looking at the UV conditions, where like Zara was saying, the sticker or the wetter that we're using to try and maximise the coverage. Look at applying when the Platella might be more active in the sort of late evening. And through the night, so that the Platella actually come up and chew on that BT and efficacy is achieved. I've got one grower who will spray 7, 8, 9 o'clock at night after he's had dinner, come out and spray, and his efficacy in a BT is about 95%. He's absolutely phenomenal, but I can't recommend highly enough just making sure you get that timing right. And I guess the last part of what I wanted to talk about was around product use and understanding application techniques for the different product uses. And we just sort of rolled into that with some of those systemic or translaminar type products. I think I've seen issues where something like a Movento was used in more recent times, and it was sprayed at about 28 degrees and a 36% relative humidity. And I only found that out when I came back into the crop 2 weeks later. I scout the crop every week, but I came back in 2 weeks later, and the efficacy just wasn't what I thought would have achieved. And when we went back through the spray diaries and whatnot, really important that we keep that information. But when I went back through the spray diaries, we could actually see and pinpoint exactly what had happened. And it's really about understanding those conditions we need to be spraying at, understanding what a delta T is, understanding where we need to really focus on a delta T. And I guess that goes back to my brother's in Broadacre. He sprays at 30 litres a hectare and he'll spray at 20 kilometres an hour. And his focus on the delta Ts is massively important. He really focuses on that. And that's something that we're still learning to do more and more in Hort. But I think we've probably we're catching up to the Broadacre guys. But the more we can learn from all parts of the industry, the better. Got anything else to add, mate? No, pretty good. Yeah, we've given them a bit of a walk through Werribee South, so I'll flick back to Zarmeen.
Beautiful. Thanks, Stuart. It was great to see that crop. We do have some time for a Q&A, and we have got some Q&A that's come through. So, Zara, there's one for you. If we can have all the speakers with their cameras on, or Zara with your camera on. What are the practical methods for effective monitoring in big farms?
So it might be good if someone from a big farm answers this. I'm not from a big farm. Don't know if you wanted to talk, Surachat. Look, you've still got to get around and monitor, don't you? You might just have to employ more agros.
Do you want to manage that?
I think too, with monitoring, it's not just about going into the same location every time. On large farms, you need to be monitoring in different locations each week or twice a week, depending on how many times you actually monitor that property. And that way it gives you a better idea of what you're actually going to be finding in the crop. So if you just kept it in one location all the time, you're going to get a false representation of what's actually, what pests and beneficials are actually in that crop. I don't know if that answers this question or not.
Yeah, so
I can,
monitoring is what I'm understanding. Yes, Stuart, go ahead.
Yeah, I can jump in there. And I mean, large farms they obviously take a little bit more time to get around, but there's generally large plantings as well. So it's not too bad. You can use a lot of tools to help you in that monitoring process as well. You know, the traps that we're just using here at Fresh Select Farms. You get a pretty good idea of what to do. You can get around them quite easily. You do have to employ a little bit, spend a bit more time in them, but once you sort of learn how to do it, yeah, not a problem.
Great, thank you. So John, I wonder if John has done any trials to investigate Azamax effect on DBM larvae population.
I tried looking at that last season. We had an IPM trial in the ground here at the research station, but unfortunately our pressure was very low, so it's fairly inconclusive from my point of view, but my understanding is it does work. And I guess, like Stuart said, it's the timing when you actually put the products on. You don't want to be put any product on during the heat of the day. Look at applying it when the actual caterpillar and the DBM in this case is actually more active at night and more exposed. You probably get a far better effect. So nighttime spraying or very late afternoon spraying is going to be more effective, and Azamax is probably going to be better applied during those times, I think.
Right, thank you. Troy, there's one for you. Are there any chemistry options coming up for DBM management?
That's a good question. Yes, from a chemical side, to develop new mode of actions takes a very, very long time, and they're quite rare actually to find really unique ones. So I think my take home would be don't expect a silver bullet to come and wipe away all of our current maybe issues and things that we're working at. And also when I look at the data from Crop Life, you know, we have got some really special pieces of chemistry from different companies, and particularly when I look at the group 28, the diamides, across a range of crops, not just brassicas, their most important tool in terms of pure performance and IPM programming fit. So we've got to look at those groups very carefully and manage them possibly differently than we have in the past. And, you know, I think about brassicas in the context of group 28s, yeah, I've got to think really, really clearly about, you know, nursery use patterns versus foliar use patterns. And Stu touched on it before about when in the crop they are used. And sometimes a good outcome if they don't get used. You know, that might be ultimately the best outcome if we can use other supporting tools to move away from them. I'd also just make a comment about I guess the diamides and some of the newer chemistry is that we're trying to preserve is that I think Stu touched on a good point is it's not just about DBM management. You know, in crops, there's a range of issues and Stu's just shown us if you've got aphids and you've got a mixed population, including DBM, that you may need other multiple products in the same application. I guess from a pest management point of view, that really makes sense and that needs to be done. But from a resistance management point of view, and in the case, again, if you've got a product like a Movento and a Belt or a Corrigan, a 23 and a 28, it makes perfect sense from a pest management point of view. But if you don't need to use those chemicals, and both of those chemicals are highly effective DBM control, then if you can, from a resistance management point of view, use them separately and use them in a rotation. We just don't have enough really, really good groups to rotate. So to split them apart, that if you don't need to cover all of those pests in one time, makes good sense as well. So again, it just comes back to understanding what's happening in the field at any one time. So yeah, no silver bullets coming. So we've got to look after what we have.
Yep, I agree. Absolutely no silver bullets coming. Thanks for that, Troy. So Stuart, I've got one for you. Do growers rely on their agronomists for stewardship and resistance advice?
I think a lot of them do, yeah, for sure. I think a lot of growers do. You know, I'm probably seeing more of the crop than what the growers do quite often. You know, my legs are. I'm walking through a huge amount of crop each week. Growers have got so many other challenges to manage through their system, whether it's labour or logistics and everything else, that they are really relying on an agronomist for sure. And you've got to find a good one that you can trust and that's there for you as well.
I think we have time for one or two more questions. So Zara, how many times a week do you spray BTs?
I don't spray at all. I sit in my office all day. So just from a resistance perspective with the BTs, we have two strains. So I'm going to pronounce this wrong, but Kostaki and Azawai, or if we use trade names, Dipel and Zentari. So just be aware that like every other chemistry, we need to be conserving BTs. We are highly, highly reliant on them, and we actually don't know how they're performing because we are not doing any resistance testing on these ones. So there's something that's a bit of a gap for us that I think we need to address at some point. As far as how frequently we need to be spraying, it comes back to monitoring again. But I imagine in summer, the guys in the lockyer are spraying at least twice a week with BTs.
I can jump in there from a Werribee South point of view. Typically, it'd be every second week, early part of the cropping cycle. So that cauliflower crop that we went and had a look at before first up, we missed the dipel opportunity the week prior. So we actually came over the Corrigan the week after. I think the patella were a little bit large for a dipel. But normally on a high pressure year, we would put something like 2 BTs. Maybe at week 2 or 3 after transplant, another one at sort of 4 or 5 after transplant, and then we'd come in with the other products after that that are probably a little bit more robust and going to last a little bit longer. Generally, we don't have to spray week on week.
I guess there's another one for you, Stuart. Where should we hang the traps in fields to get the best results, mainly when they have pheromone lures inside them?
Yeah, and that's one that I've been working on. You've really got to get them low in the crop. It's interesting. I do a lot of work in baby leaf as well as the broccoli and cauliflower and cabbage crops. And I found with the heading crops, I'm hanging them on the top of the sprinkler, which you probably saw before in that video. But I've found with the wild rocket and the Tatsoi and Mizuna crops, we've really got to pretty much have the trap sitting on the ground. So I'm using the sprinkler as an anchor, but having the trap sitting on the ground, because when you look at the DBM moth actually moving through the crop, they really don't fly very much higher than a few inches off the ground. So if you've got that trap sitting a foot or 12 inches off the ground, off the top of the crop, it just doesn't pick up the DBM. So it's really crop specific. Really get it down to where the DBM are flying through. And there's the sort of the indication of numbers that it gave us in that sort of October, November high pressure period was really valuable and really helped us greatly with our control.
Fantastic. Thanks, Stuart. And that is all that we have time for now. So just thank you to all the speakers, Troy, John, Zara, and Stuart. And thank you to all the audience who's joined us. And we'll see you at another webinar soon. Thanks.
Thanks, Armin.
Good afternoon. Bye.
Cheers.
Thanks all.